Reconvene and move on to the consent agenda. So for those of you in the audience, or everybody watching or online, the items on the consent agenda are considered to be routine and may be approved by a blanket motion. However, any board member can remove an item from the consent agenda for discussion or for separate action by just requesting such an action. So what I would do is note that the items we have on the consent agenda are approval of the minutes for April 22nd, 2015, a resolution, which is a standing resolution, which actually isn't in the packets, that directs all ordinances shall be read by title only, so that our general counsel does not need to read the entire ordinance. A resolution 15-05-18, which is authorizing a modification to a contract with A-Rink Incorporated for central control system software upgrades for the Portland-Milwaukee Light Rail Project. Resolution 15-05-19, which is authorizing a contract with G4S Secure Solutions for a ticket vending machine revenue collection services. Resolution 15-05-20, authorizing a contract for Pension Consulting Alliance, Inc. for providing investment advisory services for the pension trust funds. Resolution 15-05-21, which is adoption of an election of limits for uninsured motorist benefits and election of no personal injury protection, and also superseding a prior resolution. And then the final item on the consent agenda is Resolution 15-05-22, which is authorizing the transfer of appropriated funds within the 2015 general fund budget. So with that, is there any items that any member of the board would like to have removed from consent agenda? Seeing none, I will point out that we have two new board members here who have received the packets, but I also know they weren't here for the minute, for example, the last meeting, so they don't know what's going on. So I will see if they want to participate. It's okay to abstain, and I'll ask for abstentions. So is there a motion to approve then the consent agenda as presented?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right, then I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion to approve the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I abstain.
And I have two abstentions, our new members, which I understand, and thank you very much. All right, well, let's move on to resolutions then. First resolution is Resolution 15-05-23, which is adopting the fiscal year 2015-16 annual budget and appropriating funds. Mr. General Manager.
Board President, members of the board, it's really with great pleasure that we can present this budget to you. This budget is really all about service and safety and reliability, and those are the major investments that we have in this overall budget. I would note that related to service, I would start with the opening of the Orange Line, which occurs in September, a mere 108 days from today. But we also have a great deal of additional service on our bus system, full restoration of frequent service at all intervals and all days of the week, as well as crowding, response to crowding and schedule reliability, and some additional service on top of that. So we're very pleased to sort of see that whole service aspect be emphasized in this budget. I'd also just very quickly review the process that we've gone through. As you know, the budget is a long string of activities that really start with the agency right after the first of the year, where we actually ask our staff to begin to put together suggestions for the budget as we begin to analyze cost trends and structures associated with the budget. As we look at, actually even before the holidays, we actually look at the long-term forecast of how this particular fiscal year fits into the overall structure of our long-term finances. As you know, we brought the original draft of the budget to your meeting in March, and you approved that for submission to the Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission. They held a separate hearing in April where they actually went through it. I would say that the hearing was unusual because it was so positive, and actually we were able to hear some very positive comments from the TSCC about the clarity of the budget and how the actual numbers were aligning with the priorities that we spoke in a very open way. So we appreciate that review very much. We do, as I mentioned, related to service, have a $505 million operating budget. Bus service hours will increase 2% overall. 2% might not sound much, but it translates to $5 million of additional investment. Again, as I noted, fully restoring frequent service. Max service hours will increase on the order of 15%, most of that going to the Orange Line. About 1.1 million will fund the restoration of weekend frequent service, which actually, again, we're starting this June. I'd also note there's a big boost in streetcar service as we begin close the loop. We close the loop over the Tillicum Crossing and connect the CL line with the north-south line on the west side of downtown. I'll make this point also in relation to one of the public comments. The streetcar currently carries about 15,000 riders on a daily basis. So it is very effective local circulation service within, frankly, our biggest transit market. We can talk a little bit more about that as we get to the streetcar resolution per se. I'm also very pleased, as Alan noted, we're making substantial improvements in North Clackamas County and even in parts of southeast Portland to the bus service that supports the Orange Line opening. Many of the bus lines in North Clackamas County will actually see a doubling of service, as well as a reorientation to better serve the Orange Line stations. I'm very pleased also this budget has a strong component of our recapitalization of the agency. We have on the order of 77 new buses provided for in this budget. That will actually bring us up to our desired age of the bus fleet, which is 8 years. And that's been a long struggle. Many members of the board have supported over a period of time, and we greatly appreciate that. During fiscal year 16, we'll have over 325 new style buses on the road, which is most of the base fleet that you see out on the Monday through Friday midday sorts of service. I'd also note that we have some other capital improvements that are well covered in this budget, including the trolley barn retrofits that Director Esmond asked about earlier. And we also have a number of track and signal and maintenance projects included in the budget as well, including some of the improvements, again, related to the platforms, elevators, and other elements of the Blue Line stations, which, as you know, are beginning to approach 30 years of age. We also include a number of safety improvements in the budget. We have a 2-year program underway to replace our analog closed-circuit television. Yes, analog is that old word, to become digital. And that also allows us to manage that data in a much more effective way. We'll also see pedestrian crossing improvements, again, addressing some of the areas where there are substantial changes in land use in particular that changes pedestrian movement around our light rail system. And we'll complete the installation of the positive train control system on the West train. Now, this has been one of those topics that's gotten a little attention since the Amtrak accident on the East Coast. You should know that we already have many elements of positive train control underway and operating with the West system. This upgrade will actually bring it in compliance with those future year Federal Railroad Administration standards. And so it's another element, another layer of safety device that is added on to the system. And that will be completed by the end of this calendar year on schedule with current Federal Railroad Administration increases. I'd also just note that there are wage increases for the third time in 6 years. Non-union employees will see a 3% wage increase, and union employees will see the 3% wage increase under their contract, plus the step increases that their progression and various classes of employees include as well. I'd also wanted to note a couple of changes from the original budget that you saw and submitted to the TSCC. And is actually in front of you now, and I will ask for some help from Dee on many of these points. But I did want to note, related to the wage increases or personnel costs, we have included some additional costs related to a major bus bridge that we will need as we replace some of the switches around the Rose Quarter. And again, we want to make sure that we're offering a very good and almost seamless service for our customers, but there will be an extended period of time when we'll have to take that train out of that section of track out of service as we replace the worn switches. And so we've added $265,000 to the budget for the wages associated with that bus bridge. We've also made an adjustment to our frontline supervisors' salaries. We have a factor that we call compression, which is that as wages have increased for our union workers over time, our frontline supervisors have fell somewhat behind. And our goal from an HR perspective is to bring those frontline supervisors between 3 and 5% over the salary of the average union employee they supervise. And the main reason for that is we try to recruit those supervisors from our union workforce. And so we need to create a bit of an incentive for people to make the jump to the management or non-union ranks. And so that is a relatively small increase, generally $3,000 to $3,500 per employee. These are all employees that make somewhere between 70 and probably average 75 to 80,000 on an annual basis. So they're not high wage employees in that sense. But again, I think this is a really important step just in terms of wage equity and adjustments. The cost for that is, I believe, $284,000. We've also made some adjustments in the diesel fuel budget, actually bringing it down again. We brought it down first for the March budget, but also for this budget. That will take out about a reduced cost by about $2 million in addition. And again, your resolution has information on the exact price per gallon that we're assuming, which is still a little bit above where what the current prices we're currently experiencing. So we still have a little bit of a margin in case prices go up as the year progresses. The other note is a couple of sort of changes that are major sort of switches in how we have use some resources. One is that related to the Portland-Milwaukee project, we've actually reduced the required expenditures by about $75 million. And that's based on where we are today with the current expenditures in this fiscal year, plus what we anticipate in the next fiscal year, which, by the way, won't be all the expenses because there will be some expenses that will go into the fiscal year following this budget. So that went down by about $75 million, but we also added into the budget the budget authority to do some refinancing of some current debt. That will be subject to additional board and finance committee review in the future, but it provides the authority so that we have that option if you choose to make choose to do that refinancing. I'd also note that all of this adjusts at some level our ending fund balance by about $4 million overall. And I would also note that there is an adjustment associated with that, which is is really a reclassification of funds, which Dee can explain much better than I. But fundamentally, it's funds that won't be needed, that won't be used for interest debt service this year, but will be needed next year. So based on the potential of refinancing, the requirement for those funds shifts from this year to next year. But so it's not really cash found, it's just cash payment deferred for a year. And if I haven't blown that explanation too much, I would ask for any additional comments or questions from the board and any clarification or correction from our Chief Financial Officer, Dee Brookshire.
Just on the equipment on the Milwaukee Light Rail.
Yes.
The warranties for equipment and signaling, et cetera, they're 5 years, 2 to 5 years, or?
The exact amount I can't tell you, but they are under warranty. Mr. Blocker, do you have better information? And we do track this very particular. Frankly, for the vehicles, it ends up being hundreds of thousands of dollars of costs that we recover from the manufacturers over time.
Virtually everything is under some sort of warranty. Some are shorter, some are longer. I can't give you the specifics of each piece of equipment, but I can get back to you with
You
a
feel pretty
schedule that would
comfortable?
show that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And if, I don't know what, I don't know, I think I got on the wrong side of the bed this morning, but if there's a long-term delay or we're down, how does that impact or our liability, or do we get, recover some damages?
It depends.
I
on
know
the
this is kind of way out there, but
It's a fair question. It depends on the specific instances and warranty language for each one.
okay.
I might just add that most, if there are warranty repairs, we most typically make those repairs ourselves with our own forces and then back charge the manufacturers. Just because we're on site, we see the urgency and the need to get it done in a very quick way.
And they've provided, like Siemens has provided training to our mechanics?
Yes.
Extra, hey, new equipment,
Yes,
We're-
we
okay.
have a full training regime, and it does include services by Siemens in that case
yeah.
to help instruct our operators and our mechanics.
All right, thank you.
Other questions? I guess I'd just say also, I think it's good, I'm glad we're looking at kind of the capital projects and what we're actually able to get out the door and make sure we don't have that money sitting in the budget and not being able to utilize. But I see, obviously, we're gonna be moving those monies into future years. So essentially, we have a call on those dollars. And the same way with our ending fund balance, just again, make it clear, those are monies that we need for the future payments, just in different years is all we're talking about doing.
That's correct.
Okay. Other questions? All right, so we've have had a significant amount of briefing, hearings, and discussions on the budget over the last 3 or 4 months. I want to commend the staff for putting together a good budget. I want to say thank you for all the outreach you've done. I think the input and feedback we've gotten from everybody, from the Tax Conservation and Coordinating Committee to others, indicates it's a good budget, well done, and we should move forward. So I guess based on that, is the board ready to make a motion to approve Resolution 15-05-23, which is adopting a fiscal year 2015-16 annual budget and appropriating funds?
So moved.
Oh, don't all jump here. Who was that?
Joe can have it, I'll take the second.
All right, so motion and a second here, we have that. I suspect there may be further discussion on this, so I'll open the floor for discussion, further discussion if anybody has any. Nope. All right, I think everybody's ready to vote. So with that, all those in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 15-05-23, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Is there any abstentions?
I abstain.
And we have 2 abstentions. All right. Thank you very much. I think when you get into looking at the budget, you're going to learn a lot about it over the next year, but it's well thought out, and I'm really pleased to see the service restoration. I think that's just critical to what the region wants us to do. All right, thank you. Well, let's move on then to Resolution 15-05-24, which is authorizing modifications to the streetcar operating agreement with the City of Portland. Mr. General Manager.
Members of the board, and this is, again, sort of in the order after the budget for a very particular reason, which is that all of our agreements with the City of Portland basically say any of our contributions to streetcar operation are really subject to the budget actions of the Trimet Board of Directors, so that you can consider the streetcar funding in relation to all the other priorities that you have. But I would tell you that the action in front of you is actually in line with the current budget that you adopted. And I also wanted to just step back, since you had some comments about this, a little bit about our relationship with the City of Portland and the streetcar operations. There was a very definitive policy background to what you see in front of you, and that was defined in the streetcar master agreement with the City of Portland. And under that agreement, we took on, over time, a gradual increase of the operating costs associated with the streetcar because as the growth in passenger usage continued to grow, it became more a part of the overall transit system. And then at a certain point in time, we ramp up to a point where there's always a city contribution to the overall operations. When there's a new line, like the CL line, the city actually contributes about half of the operating cost, and we the other half. An established line with heavy operations, with heavy patronage, like the north-south line, we contribute a much higher percentage. I think if you look in here, those numbers are in there, and I won't remember off the top of my head, but a much higher percentage of the overall operating cost. In exchange, the city takes on full responsibilities for the maintenance and the new construction, and in other words, the capital cost and the recapitalization of the system. So this is a partnership where the city does contribute funds both to the operations, but more importantly to those capital elements of the system. And the policy of that and the rationale and the background of that is really laid out in that streetcar master agreement, which was approved by the board some time ago. So what you see in front of you is really just the fulfillment of those policy statements and directions that are outlined in that master agreement. And again, to note, the streetcar does carry 15,000 riders, which is a very hefty sum. And actually, one of the contributions to this overall increase in streetcar funding recognizes frankly, the work that the streetcar does for the Trimet system, and that many of our riders who will use a bus system or a light rail system to come downtown transfer to the streetcar to get to their ultimate destination. And so in that regard, it's not just serving city residents, it's serving our system as well. And again, city residents are part of our constituency and part of our overall operation. What I think is really driving this right now is the establishment of the full CL loop around the central city, central east side across the Tillicum Crossing, 10th and 11th, and across the Broadway Bridge, serving a complete loop around the central city, combined with the north-south line that will run from northwest Portland down to South Waterfront. And that will then allow doubled up, if you will, a more frequent service during on the segment of line that sees highest ridership, which is really between PSU and the Pearl District. So again, I think this does have a strong policy background. Certainly, it's always possible to revisit that policy. But the other thing I would note, it is a multi-year agreement, but each year is subject to the actions and appropriations of related to the budget. So each year you do revisit it associated with the budget work as you just have. The other minor point I just would note is we've also included in this cost this estimate the additional cost of a new hours of service regimen for all rail operators. And again, that's true on the the MAX system as well as the streetcar system. And that required some additional staffing in order to provide the separation and shift time for all operators. So with that, I'll pause and answer any questions or bring people who might really know how to answer questions up for you.
So do I have some questions from the board? This one? I don't see any questions. Okay.
I've got a quick question in regards to, just as we look at, I'm a huge believer in kind of a multimodal service opportunities for all the communities that we serve. And, as we get into the streetcar, being, that I represent a more suburban constituency, as we look at some of these things, it's always something that we always want to take a look at and evaluate. Have we done, you said 15,000 folks ride it. Is that, I'm assuming that's a daily number?
Yes.
Have we done any type of look at, I would assume that with the streetcar, there's probably going to be some cannibalization of ridership from bus service and potentially MAX. Have we looked at that in any regard?
We have, and one of the characteristics of this particular streetcar alignment is that it's running where there is not a lot of bus service. So for example, and we sort of forget how long the streetcar has been running, but and the Pearl District has been developing. There was no major north-south service into the Pearl District before the streetcar. So that is service that we think we would have had to provide given the development in that district in any case. And we have continued to watch the ridership numbers on the central loop line, and frankly, there was some concern on our part that there could be some shifting between the streetcar, which has a cheaper fare, and some of our buses, and we really have not seen that to be the case. More so, we see the streetcar actually serving that distribution function. Now, we'll continue to watch that as the connection is made across the Tillicum Crossing, and there'll be a whole series of new travel patterns that can be established. The other thing I might note, which might provide another little bit of comfort, is that when we look at the cost effectiveness, if you will, cost per rider for streetcar, it's very equivalent to our frequent service bus lines. So it provides a good level of service at a very favorable cost per ride.
Another quick question in regards to more so the subjectivity of it. I sometimes I hear that, well, the streetcar is a slow system. I've ridden the streetcar. It actually got me to my destination faster than I could have walking, but that's my own personal experience. So I enjoyed the ride. I didn't see it as something that was slow. That took me all the way across town. So have we done any type of surveys to find out the satisfaction of the folks that ride the streetcar? Because that's something I hear, fairly consistently.
The answer is yes, but I'm not able to really, I'm looking to see if Alan has any, if Alan still.
Sorry, not a lot to contribute unless Dan Bauer at PSI has more detail. They've done some, but not as extensive as we have.
Perhaps we can get some, whatever information we've got back to you.
Yeah, that would be helpful, just to kind of have that, because again, I've ridden it, and it was a pleasant experience. I didn't have to put more time on my shoe leather trying to walk all the way across town, when I'm downtown without a vehicle.
Well, I don't think the streetcar prides itself so much on its speed, but it does provide great access. And 15,000 riders are choosing to use it, so that tells us something too.
Thank you.
I have a question. I was thinking about, I should know this, but obviously my Trimet fare works on the streetcar, works on the gondola, or the, I forget what we'll call it. Tram, thank you, the real tram. I only worked on it for a few
It doesn't work on the tram, but
Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't.
It does. When did they change
not
that?
supposed to.
I'm not sure I've never worked on that tram.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I've used it. Well, let me on. But there, so the question is, if you buy the $2 ticket, that's not, cannot be used on a Trimet system.
That's correct.
Correct, okay, that's what I thought, all right.
That's correct.
I'm gonna double check the tram, because
We are, and by the way, I would also tell you that streetcar is a very active partner in our electronic fare program. So as we roll out the electronic fare system, we'll roll that out on the streetcar as well as the rest of our system at that point.
Okay. I don't see any more questions, so is the board ready to proffer a motion on Resolution 15-05-24?
So moved.
I hear a motion. Do I hear a second? I hear a motion and a second. Is there further discussion on the motion?
Just got a quick comment in regards to the timing. I think it was referenced earlier about, 3-year agreement, and, Neil, just to reference that we do process this on a yearly basis from a budget allocation perspective, so that makes me comfortable that we do get to revisit it, because, as things change, there's always something that potentially comes up, and having the opportunity to revisit it on a yearly basis or annual basis gives me the comfort to move forward a 3-year agreement.
Good. I would just comment, I think that John Charles's comments about the fare box recovery kind of goals and policy is a good one. I think it may fit in more with the items we have later on the agenda, but that's one that I think we do need to look at. But again, I think in this one, it's the way that I understand it, it works. That's why I asked the question. I'm comfortable with moving forward.
Yep.
All right. So, any more comments? All right. All those then in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 15-05-24, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Is there anybody opposed? How about abstentions?
I abstain.
I hear two abstentions. Thank you very much. Okay, so the resolution is approved. Well, let's move on then to Resolution 15-05-25, which is authorizing ride connection to provide job access reverse commute services. Thank you. Mr. General Manager.
Board President, members of the board, of course, you've heard a bit about this already. I think these are very valuable service. What this contract would do is actually add $235,000 to the contract with Ride Connection so that these services can be provided through Trimet fiscal year 2017. As I noted, there is going to be, I think, additional activity and discussion about how we continue these programs going forward. But this does allocate the pass-through funds from this federal program, Jobs Access Reverse Commute, to this program and sort of zeroes out, if you will, that historic account of funds that no longer flow to us, but have come to us in the past. And it would continue the existing services, particularly focused on Forest Grove and Tualatin shuttles that you saw displayed on the PowerPoint earlier. So with that, I just pause and answer any questions because, again, there was an earlier presentation, and perhaps I'll keep it short.
Comment, comment. It's just, it looks like we're going to be doing more of this into the future. So how we get there with funds and service areas, especially with the swing shift stuff. I mean, that's important.
I might know
Especially
that-
when you're the lower income, so
Yep.
that would help facilitate things. Plus, take more cars off the road, so. I don't have an answer, just kind of a statement. There wasn't any question.
And I think we will be coming back to you later in the year with some notions about how we can move forward with these programs and actually grow them around the region.
I agree. Any further questions of staff on this item? I think it's fairly straightforward. I'll just note that I do get continual pinging by the community about when are we going to provide that kind of service to the growing employment area north of the Sunset Highway in the Hillsborough area. So there's just needs all throughout the region, and I think that's what we're all saying, and we understand that. So we look forward to seeing how we can keep this program in operation and expand it in the future. All right. Well, let's call the question then. All those in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 15-05-25, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Is there anybody opposed? And do we have any abstentions?
I abstain.
I see two abstentions. Thank you. So the motion is approved. All right, so now we get down to, look at that timing. I said we get to this about before noon. I think we're right at noon.
No, we just needed a first and a second on that, unless I missed
Oh,
something.
I thought we had the,
On this one?
did we not have a motion?
Yeah,
We did on the last
Well,
no, we didn't have it.
we did not, okay. Well, let's start over
On the JARC?
on the JARC.
I so moved.
Do we have a second? All right.
You got your, there you go.
Do I need to redo the, General Counsel, do I need to redo the vote?
No.
All right. Thank you for calling me on my error. I appreciate that. All right, so that concludes our resolutions this morning and allow us to move on to the two ordinances we have before us. First is Ordinance 338, which is regarding an honored citizen fare increase. I'm going to turn to Trimet's General Counsel, Shelley Devine, for a second reading of this ordinance by title only. Ms. Devine?
Thank you, Mr. Board President. Ordinance number 338 of the Tri-County Metropolitan Transportation District of Oregon, adopting honored citizen fare increases and amending Trimet Code Chapter 19. This is the second reading.
Thank you very much. Mr. General Manager, do you have some comments on this ordinance?
Yes, Mr. Board President, members of the board, I would just note that you have received lots of public comment on this. We've also reviewed this thoroughly with our Committee on Accessible Transportation and Transportation Committee of Elders in Action, and you have recommendations positively from those two groups. together with the recommendations for the mitigation program and outreach associated with it. The proposal, just to sort of wrap this up, is a 25% increase for a single ride, but an increase of from $26 to $28 for the monthly pass, so a much more modest increase on the monthly pass. You recall that actually, again, in 2011, 2012, we raised fares pretty dramatically throughout the rest of the system. At that time, the board agreed to hold the Honored Citizen fare steady, because at that point in time, we were also ramping up the increase in the lift fare from a discounted level to the same price as the adult all-zone fare. And out of consideration of that impact and the impacts of the recession that was underway at the time, you chose at that point in time, or your predecessors chose, to keep that fare steady, as all the other fares increased. I would also note that related to that, we've had a couple of retreats over the last 2 years that have focused partially, at least, on the fare structure and the direction of the fare system over a period of time. And in those retreats, you continued to sort of focus on a long-term direction of simplifying the fare and aligning the fares and creating a structure that could be sustainable over a long period of time, which was that all the different fare levels are pegged to one another, and so that there is great predictability and moderate changes in fares as you move forward. And over the last couple of years, we've begun to take actions related to implementing that those fare changes. For example, at this time last year, you actually approved a reduction in the youth fares, because one of the conclusions of your retreat review was that youth fares were too high and compared to our peers, but our Honored Citizen fare was relatively low compared to our peers. I'd also would note that earlier this year, you also approved a change in the transfer time that actually creates greater value for all of your fare instruments, which now are good for 2.5 hours rather than 2 hours. So I would first of all say that it's never easy to raise fares, and it's certainly never easy to raise the Honored Citizen fare. And I think we all understand and have great sympathy and consideration for our honored citizens that actually use this fare instrument. But we'd also believe that this is a time when the system is actually expanding. We're offering greater value in terms of more service on the street. We're actually more value in terms of the time extension of the system, and we have fully ramped up that increase associated with the lift fare that was the initial reason for holding the Honored Citizen fare steady. So with all of that, we do recommend the adoption of this ordinance, recognizing that it's a difficult topic, but that implementation would also include the expansion of the mitigation program that you've heard described. And just to note that mitigation program would change our current mitigation program, where right now we limit our discount on Honored Citizen fares to 5%. We would decrease that to 20% for those, and also expand the grant program by about $200,000 on an annual basis to cover additional need. My hope is actually that can actually address some very targeted needs in our community. And I think, as we know, there is need and impacts associated with every fare category and low-income people in every fare category. And I think what this is really about is just trying to find the right balance of different fare categories within the overall system. So with that, Mr. President, concludes my remarks. I'm certainly happy to answer questions or bring other staff up to respond to questions the board may have. But again, we appreciate your consideration of this very, very difficult item.
Thank you. I think that's a good summary. Based on what you're saying, I think the board, we've seen the amount of outreach that you folks have done. You've done a good job of getting out there, talking with the community. I want people in the audience to know we've seen and heard the comments from the community members, and I need to state that the majority of them don't really want us to increase fares for honored citizens. We have taken a look at, received, and reviewed the transit equity analysis, the Title VI work that Jared Franz mentions. I would point out, I believe that has also been sent to the Federal Transit Administration a number of weeks ago for their review, and have we heard anything from them that we're
We
heading?
haven't heard anything, but frankly, we wouldn't
Yeah,
expect to
I wouldn't think so,
naturally
yeah.
in a normal
Right,
course
right.
of business.
And I think the board, those who are on the board previously, know that we've talked about this a lot, and the need to actually move forward and get our fares in alignment with what we thought was appropriate. And we also took seriously what CAT committee said and what the Elders in Action said, that, move forward with this, but do it with some important mitigations. And I think, we understand the mitigations, and I think I'll have some comments later when we get into this about the future, but I think it's clearly an issue that we and many others need to focus on, not just Trimet. So I think I'm going to open it up for discussion by the board, or we can get a motion on the table and then have discussion, but I think I'd like to just start with the discussion now, if that's all right with the board. Okay? Because I know there's a lot of board members that probably have some thoughts and comments about this particular item. Do we need to call on folks today? Would you like to go?
Okay. Neil said that it's never easy to have to raise fares. I think I would also add that there's never a good time. Because there's always legitimate concerns about the impact of rate increases, fee increases, fare increases on the most vulnerable in our community. The other part that that we also have to look at is the kind of the business side of the organization, because we are responsible for maintaining a well-functioning, stable, and quite honestly, well-funded service. Otherwise, we can't provide the services ultimately, and we are just out of a very difficult time period where we couldn't provide services. Comments have been made that we have a hefty ending fund balance, therefore we don't have to do this. Throughout my career, the one time I see organizations getting in trouble with financial decisions is if you look at it in the short term. You have to look at it over the long term. And so to build a fair structure that is fair, equitable, makes sense, and can sustain the operations of this agency over the long term, I think is a primary concern. Again, but you have that vulnerable population out there. And for me, the contribution for fair mitigation, I think it's a way to try to strike the balance, and for me, it does strike the balance. We have good experience with our low-income fare mitigation through the programs that we already have in place, that we are already funding. We have experienced partners out there who also provide services to many of the same people who take advantage of the honored citizen fare. And so it is through that it is my hope, my wish, that we will in fact mitigate some of the worst impacts of this, at the same time allowing this agency to move forward and continue to provide needed services over the long term.
So I've got a couple of questions, primarily with the report that we're looking at here, the equity analysis. So I don't know I don't know if Janelle would be available.
I think the answer is yes.
And Jake's not with us today, so we'll see how it goes.
So as I look at page 4, I'm assuming, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but as I look at this proposed, I'm looking at table 3 of this document, and basically, if I look at the number or the percentage of honored citizens that utilize during this time frame that utilize 30-day passes, it appears that the percentage of non-minority is 57%, and the percentage of minority trips during this time period is 47% utilizing an honored citizen 30-day pass. Am I reading that correctly? I'll give you a second to get to the page and quickly orient yourself. It's page 4, so I think you're gonna have to flip it over. And right down there at the bottom.
Okay. Would you say that again, please, Director Stoll?
So it says fair media to the left, and then it says honored citizen monthly 30-day pass. And then if we look at it, it says percent of non-minority trips. I'm assuming that this says non-minority trips that utilize a 30-day pass is 57%.
That's correct, Director Stoll.
And then the percentage of minority trips is 47.
That's right.
So this breakdown is telling us that a vast majority or a majority of honored citizens utilize a 30-day pass, it appears.
That's correct, and Director Stovall, as we went back, as you'll recall, we had a preliminary analysis with respect to the honored citizen fare increase, and this is something that when, upon taking a second look, we acknowledged that, in fact, honored citizens more frequently utilize the 30-day pass, which obviously is going up at a lesser amount, $2. So
Correct.
You're reading this table correct.
So if I go back to the low-income ridership share, it's on page 6, and this was referenced a couple times this morning already, where they highlight it to say that 63% of the honored citizen group is low income. That number was shared, that percentage was shared earlier, 63%. What this is telling me is that some of the low-income folks that we're referencing actually utilize 30-day passes as opposed to single fare tickets.
That is
And
correct.
we don't necessarily have a breakdown based on this, the number of folks that utilize the 30-day passes in comparison to low income or higher income. So that data I don't think I saw in this report.
We can get you that data. We do have that. It may not be referenced in this particular report. The purpose of that comparison really is to illustrate when looking at, narrowly, when looking at honored citizens' usage based on income demographic, that's to illustrate of all of the fare media, which are the options that low-income folks are tending to use. And that's what that illustrates.
Correct.
Passes being a big chunk of that.
So and so that's what I'm trying to wrap my mind around, is that a large percentage of the honored citizens are actually using the 30-day passes, which will see about an 8% increase as opposed to the 25% increase. And then some folks, and we don't have the breakdown here, some folks who may be high income also are using the 30-day, but they're also could be using the single one-day pass or single fare pass. I had one other question in regards to the community engagement. We've got our kind of summarization here of the CAT committee, and then also TIAC, and then the stakeholder roundtable. There was a reference made in the public comment to something in regards to the TIAC. Yeah, I don't know if you were here at that point
No,
in time.
I'm not sure it was.
TIAC subcommittee.
Voted, my understanding from that testimony, against raising this, but the full TIAC did not vote.
Well, thank you, Director Bethel, for clarifying. I should note that TIAC did not take any formal motion on the actual honored citizen fare increase. We did provide to TIAC an update, and the understanding, to my knowledge at that juncture, was generally okay with it so long as we had in place some level of mitigation. So we did not have a specific subcommittee taking a vote on this particular motion. In the past, if TIAC were to come forth with a recommendation, it would be in the form of a letter, and we did not have that as part of the work plan for this issue.
Is there a reason why?
I think part of it, Director Stovall, was acknowledging CAT and a number of other committees whose primary focus is issues pertaining to honored citizens. That also there are a number of other things on the docket that is keeping TIAC busy. But staff did feel very pressed, and we felt it important to ensure that TIAC weighed in on it. But the group as a whole did not feel as if they wanted to offer a formal recommendation.
One last question. I didn't know that was going to be my last question, but you just reminded me of something really quick.
You're on the road, Dr. Stovall.
In regards, yeah, well, Joe was on a roll earlier. Now I've got the roll going. Just really quickly, in regards to the mitigation program.
Yes.
So the mitigation program would be able to be utilized across all fare media, not just a single ticket, but it would be available to all of those opportunities.
Yes, that's correct, Director Stovall. And similar to the mitigation program we currently have in place, depending upon the organization who's using or purchasing the fares, obviously it would be good for both single fare as well as monthly fares. As General Manager McFarland pointed out earlier, this will be a renewed and a new incentive for a number of organizations because we were capping their mitigation at 5%. Now that will go up to 20%. So there'll be a number of new organizations who frankly aren't participating in a mitigation program who will be added to the list of participants. We'll also work in tandem and closely with Ride Connection and making sure that we both outreach to organizations who serve folks with disabilities, which I think is one of the highest folks who potentially may be impacted, but making sure that we're communicating all the additional services, such as the 7 and 14-day passes. But yes, to answer your question more poignantly, it will be good across all fare media.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Beth, would you
Nope, he already got my question answered for me around that TIAC thing.
How many, Janelle, how many organizations are there?
That's an excellent question. We took a look at this list about last week. When combining the list of both those who are organizations who are receiving a small grant from Trimet, as well as those participating in the 20% discount program, we have over 85 organizations.
85.
And so, we like to say that we have roughly over 80% of the major nonprofit organizations and community-based organizations in the region serving low-income populations. Obviously, this list will increase as we do more targeted outreach to organizations who serve folks with disabilities, and as well as organizations who serve honored citizens who will now be able to participate in the program as a result of it pushing up to 20%.
I just had a thought here. Reaching out to various churches or temples or just from the pulpit. Seriously.
Sure.
Just to get just another way of getting the word out.
Absolutely, Director Esmond. That is part of the outreach strategy.
Okay.
We're reaching out in tandem, again, with both our Trimet staff as well as with Ride Connection to all sorts of places of faith, but also to care facilities and senior homes and a whole host of things and organizations who serve our most vulnerable populations. But part of this effort will involve going back to CAT and asking them for their good counsel and advice as to how we implement the strategies, I think, moving forward. It's always part of a continuous improvement effort.
Having just signed up for Medicare and filed for AARP,
Congratulations. I hope to be there one day.
Congratulations. I didn't tell my wife, but she's. How about hospitals?
In fact,
A notification, I'm falling apart. I just, be your medical facilities. Just an idea.
That's an excellent question. And in fact, on our list of participants for the mitigation program. We have worked with the VA hospital, for instance, who's a participant, and that is one of the strategies is working with, again, care facilities, hospitals. We recently had a conversation with Legacy Health. But as you can imagine, it's going to be across the board, and we'll do our due diligence to make sure we engage a number of organizations.
Yeah, well, I got some other ones too, but but with your, I feel comfortable that we're going to do everything we can, as usual, above and beyond, it seems like, to do outreach and, for the mitigation. So, I'll be in touch with you about that. So, yeah, I'm good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Janelle.
I guess I just want to say a few things based on some of the testimony. We're in an unusual position where, usually when we get more riders, we make more money if you're a private sector. In our case, every additional ride we have, we lose additional monies. We have to have subsidies to be able to provide that service. And I think Director Prosser put it well, is we've got to look at the long term. We've got to look at the demands on the organization and what the region expects. They'd like to see us double our transit service. So we need to be very, I guess, deliberate in our fares, our fare policies, and I think that's, again, a good thing to look at in the future. And again, maximize as much as possible without having adverse impacts, which we know that this will impact some of our citizens adversely. But I also believe that the mitigation programs that you folks have come up with are valuable. I know as a board member for a social service agency that operates here in the Portland area, they've taken advantage of our mitigation program, and they operate senior housing, and I know darn well they're going to be viewing this as a very positive thing for the organization and for their clients. So I'm looking forward to that. Having said that, I think the bottom line is we've got to do something about, low-income folks in transportation, and it shouldn't be entirely Trimet's burden to figure out. I mean, that's the thing I think that we need to keep in mind. I look at what Seattle's done. We're watching their program with interest, where in essence it created a low-income housing program, or transportation program that involved various agencies, and it is a means testing. It does have means testing. It says, you need to be approved to be on this program, and it's being done by somebody else other than a transit agency. Obviously, they have sales tax and other things that they're putting towards their service, but I also remember that they increased every other fare in the system, was it 25 cents per ride, to pay for about half of the program, and they're still needing to come up with another $11 or $12 million a year. So I'm looking forward to seeing what we need to do. So Jared, we do need to work together. This is the important thing, and I think we need to get out of the box of Trimet and actually open this up to a broader discussion about how we actually engage all of the governments and all the social service agencies to come up with something that deals with this particular issue in a holistic manner. Because I don't want to have this discussion again, because we'll have it every time we want to start talking about a 5-cent increase, and that's what we should have done, is index this or moved it up so it's raised on a more regular basis, and we wouldn't have this kind of problem. But I worry about the provision of transit service in the in this region. I worry about our most vulnerable citizens, and I don't think we have a solution here that's going to without taking action, is going to help the situation at all. In fact, maybe it will spur some folks to actually talk about this in a more holistic manner. And so that's what I hope we can do out of this. To the ladies who talked about us not operating like a business, I think Director Prosser did a great job of outlining that there's a lot of people out there who pay our payroll tax, which supports the majority of our operations, who actually feel like we should be operating like a business. So I think there's a balance that we need to have, and I'm hoping that we've struck it in our rates here and fares, and and you have our commitment to look at this on an annual basis, if not earlier, if we're running into some issues. I'll count on you, Janelle, and your staff to tell us how we're doing in those areas. So I'm looking forward to a meatier discussion of this, and maybe it's worthy of some discussion at a future board retreat where we can maybe have some other folks engaged with us. So based on that, I'm ready to move forward with the fare increase that we have before us today, understanding that it's a hard decision for all of us to make. So there's my piece. You have something else you wanted to say?
10,000 people a day retire.
Yeah, the demographic is increasing. There's no question about that. All right. So are we ready to move forward then? Is there a motion to approve Ordinance 338?
So moved.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on this item today?
I will just make one quick statement in regards to the TAC situation, which makes me just a little uncomfortable in the fact that, TAC is our Transit Equity Committee, and they actually didn't officially weigh in on the conversation. We really look to our committees to be able to give us additional information and insight, and we did get it from CAT, but not TAC. We got some information from them, but not an official position. So that gives me a little bit of concern. As we move forward, we'll certainly want to continue to utilize our committees in ways that give us the additional information once they've vetted, these reports, so that we can have their input.
And Janelle, you still here? No, stay where you are. You're all right. If the board can help with the outreach, I'll speak for myself, but I think the board would be happy to do any, help with avenues that maybe your offices haven't thought about. So just holler, as they say. Okay?
We look forward to doing so.
Okay.
All right. Looks like we're ready to call the question. Ms. General Counsel, would you like to make a roll call vote?
Thank you, Mr. Board President. We'll start with Director Esmond.
Aye.
Director Martin.
Abstain.
Director Bethel.
Aye.
Director Warner.
Aye.
Director Bauman.
Abstain.
Director Stovall.
Aye.
Director Prosser.
Aye.
The ordinance passes with an operative date of September 2015.
Thank you, Ms. General Counsel. All right. So we'll move on to the second ordinance before us, which is Ordinance 339, which is regarding service changes. Once again, I'll have our General Counsel conduct the second reading of the ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Board President. Ordinance number 339 of the Tri-County Metropolitan Transportation District of Oregon, adopting service changes, updating route designations, and amending Trimet Code Chapter 22, and repealing Trimet Code Chapter 20 charter rates. This is the second reading.
Thank you very much. Mr. General Manager, do you have some comments?
Board President, very quickly, these are the major service changes again for fiscal year 16. Key amongst it is, of course, the opening of the Orange Line, but also has a number of bus service changes, including essentially doubling the services on line 28, 31, 34, and 99. More neighborhood services in Milwaukee and Oregon City, and new connections in southeast Portland and Clackamas County. And again, updating and improving frequent service and restoring that for both bus and rail. We are also adding some service related to the implementation of the West Side Service Enhancement Plan that you heard a little bit of earlier, primarily in the frequent service categories. But anyway, very positive changes. We've had the opportunity to brief the board a number of times on the development of the service plan for the Orange Line. Again, a great deal of public outreach and communication was associated with that overall effort, where we were reaching out to the general community and trying to do the best we can with the dollars we had in terms of the service that supports the Orange Line. And again, I think we're all very pleased that not only are we able to open the Orange Line, we're able to open it with increased bus service in the supporting category or corridor, which I think is a really positive step. The other thing I would note is there is a housekeeping change associated with this as well, which is to remove the provisions that dealt with charter rates, given that federal law doesn't allow us to offer charter service. We thought it was a little odd to have it in our code, so we wanted to include that cleanup at the same time. So with that, either I or the general counsel would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. So, again, just like in the last one, as you have heard, we've done extensive outreach in the community on this one. There was a equity analysis also done on this, which was also submitted to FTA, which we've not heard anything back from FTA at this time. With that, I think we're ready to consider this. Is there a discussion or comments from the board? Want me to start that end? That's a no, you don't want me to start at that end, or you know you have no comments?
Don't point your finger at me. No comment.
All right, thank you. Dr. Beth?
No comments.
Comments?
None.
All right. Well, then, is there a motion to adopt this ordinance?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Any further discussion? If not, then, Ms. Devine, would you please do a roll call vote again?
Thank you, Mr. Board President. We'll start at the other end. How about Director Prosser?
Yes.
Director Stovall?
Aye.
Director Bauman?
Abstain.
Director Warner?
Aye.
Director Bethel?
Aye.
Director Martin?
Abstain.
Director Esmond?
Aye.
The ordinance passes.
All right, thank you very much. So there's nothing else on our agenda. Is there any other business that needs to come before the board?
Mr. Board President, members of the board, based on some of the comments, Director Esmond's comments and some other thoughts, I want to change it a little bit, the last slide of that safety presentation, and come back to you a bit. The way I would put that is that we're not waiting, but we have a measured program to implement that system. And what I heard was get on with it. And so what I'd like to do is come back to the board at a future meeting with a sort of revised schedule showing how we are going to get on with it. But again, I think I would note, and as Harry noted, we do see the need to implement this kind of a system overall. We want to be judicious about it. We also have a very full plate as an agency between now and the opening of the Orange Line. So we really need to pace ourselves a little bit in terms of doing this, but it is an important element of adding another layer of safety to the overall system. So the commitment is we will implement it. Let us come back to you with the implementation program that demonstrates the timing and the pacing of actually getting that done.
Thank you, Mr. John. Excellent summary on that one, and thank you for commitment to safety. We appreciate it. And before I adjourn the meeting, I do want to say I actually looked up the Portland Aerial Tram website on my smartphone, and Trimet cards and fares do apply to the aerial tram. Because I've gone up there, I've gone up at least 6 times on my Trimet pass. So.
Rides on the tram. That's going to make my afternoon.
Christmas lights and good too.
That's the little things in life.
This is not official business, but just an FYI. A couple of weeks ago, I had an opportunity to meet the President of the United States here in Portland. I happened to be wearing a Telecom Bridge pin. And he asked me about that. And I said, he said, is that the new bridge that I saw coming in? I said, yes, it was, sir. And, that's a nice pin. And I just happen to have a spare in my pocket.
All
so
right.
he has one. And I did invite him to the opening in September. So he said the Secret Service might have some concerns. I said, I understand, but he said after I retire, I might come back and say, well, maybe I'll get you a pass. So we'll see what happens. Yeah.
And just to make sure I didn't say it incorrectly, the tram works for the monthly and annual Trimet passes. Okay, all right, good. All right, anything else? Meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much.